Not every family party is about joy. Some are about watching where you stand without anyone needing to say it directly. Every subscribe gives strength to my voice and keeps this channel breathing. Please like, share, and hit the bell icon so our stories never fade. My name is Kieran. I am 29 years old, and the night of my brother's promotion party was the first time I understood how easily respect can disappear when it is spoken about without kindness. I watched my father stand up slowly, holding his glass, smiling in a way that looked proud but felt cold. His voice carried across the room without hesitation. I am proud of what Ethan has become. He represents success, discipline, consistency, everything a family wishes for. People around us nodded. A few smiled wider. Then he looked around the room, paused for a moment, and added with a softer but sharper tone. Not everyone manages to live up to that level. That silence was not empty. It was aimed. My brother did not miss the moment. I saw his mouth curl into a smile before he turned his head toward me. He leaned forward slightly, enjoying every second, and said, clearly so everyone could hear, "Are you the one he means? Or should I make it easier for everyone in here?" The room reacted instantly. Laughter was loud, careless, and fast. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tremble. I looked straight back at him and replied calmly, "Give me 45 minutes. You'll understand everything." Then I walked out. The next morning, my cousin sent me a message that said she could not believe what happened after I left. If this story feels familiar to you, tap like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what you would do in my place. Back when I still shared the same walls with them, life inside our home followed quiet rules that no one ever needed to explain because everyone already knew exactly who mattered and who blended into the background. I understood my place long before I could put language to how it felt. My brother Ethan was never announced as the priority, but every important decision somehow bent naturally in his direction without anyone needing to discuss it openly. When plans were made, his schedule shaped them. When conversations turned serious, his voice held weight. When something had to be chosen, the choice seemed to arrive before anyone asked for my opinion. I noticed it early, although I never spoke about it because speaking would have meant turning a silent truth into something uncomfortable for everyone else. Discomfort was treated like a problem that needed to be erased rather than understood. Mom carried herself like peace was the highest goal in our home. She rarely argued. She rarely challenged. Instead, she smoothed over moments, softened tones, redirected tension away from the person who caused it, usually toward the person who could handle silence better. I learned which parts of myself were welcome, which parts needed to stay hidden, which words should be swallowed before they reached the surface. Over time, I stopped offering ideas unless someone asked directly because offering them freely only made the quiet in the room feel heavier. Dad valued calm above everything, but his version of calm meant avoiding conflict rather than solving it. It made it easier to let things stay unspoken than to risk turning a pattern into an argument. I understood quickly that pushing back did not change outcomes. It only changed the temperature in the room, and I was always the one expected to cool it down. I adjusted without protest, not because I agreed, but because survival inside that home depended on knowing when silence was safer than truth, and when truth only created distance instead of understanding. I grew familiar with being the one who listened while decisions moved past me, with being the one who nodded while stories were told without my input, with being the one who adapted instead of being considered. It did not feel cruel in a loud way. It felt subtle. It felt normal. It felt like the air of the house, something that wrapped around you so quietly that you did not realize how tightly it was holding your breath until even breathing felt like something that needed permission. Over time, I stopped expecting to be included and started expecting to understand things from a distance. I became good at observing tone shifts, facial changes, small pauses, learning how to exist by reading what was never said out loud. That role did not arrive through an argument or a clear moment. It formed slowly through repetition until I realized that participating was never something I was trained to do. Only watching, only adjusting, only staying quiet enough to remain unnoticed. The tension in our home never exploded. It stretched quietly across years, never loud enough to break the walls, but strong enough to teach me exactly where I was allowed to stand and how small my space was meant to be. A few weeks before the party, my life shifted in a way that never showed on the surface because nothing collapsed, nothing exploded. Yet, a quiet truth began to separate what I believed from what was actually real. My best friend, Marcus, worked near systems that occasionally brushed against corporate records. Although we had always kept a clear line between friendship and professional boundaries because neither of us wanted our loyalty to turn into something dangerous, that evening felt different. Marcus arrived without jokes, without distractions, carrying a kind of calm seriousness that settled into the room before any words appeared. We sat side by side in silence for a while, not in fear, not in shock, but in quiet understanding that something heavy was about to be placed between us. Marcus explained that internal financial records connected to the company where Ethan worked had surfaced inside a routine system process that was never designed to expose more than controlled summaries. What appeared in those files did not feel like an accident or a misunderstanding. The structure showed deliberate adjustments designed to create a polished picture for anyone watching from the outside. Reports that should have shown losses were carefully reclassified. Timelines were shifted with precision. Project results were presented as growth, even when the internal reality reflected strain that outside investors would never have tolerated if they had known the truth. I remained silent, not because I felt nothing, but because I felt too much too quickly to waste it on noise. Marcus went further, showing me patterns that stretched backward over time, revealing that this was not a single bad decision or a moment of pressure, but a habit built slowly and protected carefully. This was not panic-driven behavior. This was systematic control. This was a process of burying losses beneath rehearsed confidence while presenting fragile performance as stability. I understood that behavior like this does not survive alone, which told me that silence was not just passive. It was collaborative, shared, protected by people who benefited from the illusion. Then came the detail that changed how I understood everything. Marcus showed me that the project that brought Ethan recognition did not begin in his hands. The foundation, the logic, the structure came from a colleague working beside him. That original work moved quietly through shared drafts, internal discussions, early concepts until ownership softened without open conflict.
Documents changed slowly over time. Presentation files adjusted language. Credit shifted in subtle ways until Ethan appeared more frequently than any other name, while the original creator disappeared without protest or public defense. I did not feel rage in the usual way. I did not feel betrayal in the usual way. What formed instead was a cold, steady clarity that settled where confusion used to live. Marcus reached for my hand once without pressure, without instructions, offering nothing more than acknowledgement. That support lasted only seconds, then ended completely. After that night, Marcus stepped away from the secret, returning to a normal presence in my life without trying to guide my feelings or influence my decisions. That role did not repeat. That moment did not return. I chose silence deliberately and with purpose because speaking too early would have protected the wrong people while exposing the wrong parts of myself. Silence stopped feeling like something forced on me and became something I shaped myself. I began observing patterns without visible reaction. I collected small behavioral details without making them known. I watched language, timing, reactions, pauses, all without giving away what I had learned. Nothing around me appeared different to anyone else yet. Inside I was building something steady, careful, quiet, preparing for a moment that was not yet visible. That evening in Miami was wrapped in a perfect surface with soft lighting, polished crystal glasses, controlled smiles, calculated laughter, and a space carefully constructed to celebrate success while hiding anything that did not fit the image they wanted to present to the world. It was the first time I stepped into a space like that while Ethan was already surrounded by people eager to touch his shoulder, shake his hand, hold his attention as though standing close to him made their own lives feel more valuable in the eyes of others. The scent of expensive perfume moved lightly through the air. The warmth from freshly served food spread across the room. Polished wooden surfaces reflected the light, while ambition quietly filled every corner of the space, disguised by conversations that sounded polite but carried very little truth. Mom stood near the center of the room, holding a straight posture, her eyes steady, her expression of pride maintained naturally. Dad stood beside her, a glass in his hand, his gaze moving across the crowd with satisfaction hidden beneath his familiar calm. Someone gently tapped a glass, a sound soft enough not to break the atmosphere, but clear enough to draw the attention of the entire room. Conversations slowly faded as eyes turned toward the center where the most anticipated moment was about to unfold. Dad was the one who spoke, his voice low, clear, steady enough to travel across the room without needing to be raised. "We're so proud of Ethan, not like someone who always fails." Mom nodded slightly beside him, her smile unchanged, her eyes never wavering, as if everything just said was something obvious that did not require reflection. Ethan did not react immediately. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, not in a friendly way, but with a carefully restrained expression of mockery. He turned to look at me slowly, his gaze sharp and calm, carrying a sense of control as if only two people existed in that crowded room. He spoke slowly, each word clear without needing to raise his voice. "Is that person you?" The whole room burst out laughing. It was not the kind of laughter born from discomfort or surprise, but a relaxed, careless sound full of the assumption that cruelty was a natural part of the atmosphere here. Crystal glasses tilted gently. Shoulders shook. A stray clap echoed somewhere, as if this moment deserved approval rather than being questioned. From another corner of the room, a voice rose loudly enough to be heard. "Maybe he should finally prove he's not just a shadow." The sound in the room dropped lower. Small whispers appeared. Eyes began to shift, no longer avoiding, no longer hiding, as if everyone wanted to watch the way I would break. Ethan leaned slightly toward me, his voice lowered, not because he feared being heard, but because he wanted to sharpen his words. "You won't do anything. You never do." I kept my gaze steady. I did not raise my voice. I did not look away. I did not allow any emotional reflex to surface because silence had become something I used like armor over many years. I answered clearly, calmly. "In 45 minutes you'll know the answer." I gave no further explanation, no defense, no tears, no arguments with anyone because what was about to happen did not require the approval of a room that was only used to laughing at the pain of others. I turned my back, walked past tables that were still untouched, past wine glasses that had not reached any lips, past eyes that followed every step I took, without a single person brave enough to stop me, while my breathing remained even, as if everything was already under control. Outside, the night air felt clearer than anything inside that room had been. Colder, more real and quiet enough for me to hear my own footsteps without needing to hide or adjust anything. 30 minutes later, everything inside me had changed. As I sat alone in the car, the engine still warm beneath the hood, the noise of the city sealed away by the thick glass around me, while my hands rested on the steering wheel without shaking. Even though my mind was no longer willing to accept being made smaller for another second inside silence, the air inside the car grew heavier, not from fear, but from something very old finally fracturing under the weight of too many years. My thoughts no longer moved in straight lines. Memories returned in broken order, not like a film, but like flashes of light. A dinner table where my voice was ignored. A living room where laughter belonged to someone else. A phone call I never received. A compliment I never heard. Moments piled on top of each other without warning, without shouting, without noise, but heavy enough to make breathing feel like a deliberate act. For the first time, I understood something with painful clarity. Nothing would change if I did not change myself. This was not a moment of anger. This was not revenge forming inside my chest. This was awareness. If I stayed quiet, The cycle would continue. If I stood still, I would keep shrinking. If I waited for respect, I would grow old waiting for something never meant for me. My hands moved before I allowed myself to hesitate. I reached for my phone and made a call. My assistant Riley answered on the second ring with a calm presence that had always made me feel steady. The kind of presence that never asked unnecessary questions and never filled silence with panic. For a brief moment, I listened to my own breathing through the speaker, realizing how steady it sounded, even though everything inside me had just awakened. Riley did not waste time offering comfort. Have you really thought this through? The question was not gentle. It was not dramatic. It was precise, placed exactly where it needed to be. In that moment, I realized my answer did not need a story. It did not need justification. It did not need emotion attached to it. I answered with a short sentence, controlled, firm, without hesitation, without weakness, without explanation. Yes. There was no hesitation after that. Riley did not ask more. She did not warn me. She did not tell me what to do. She understood the tone.
She heard the weight behind that single word. The call ended quietly without drawn-out goodbyes or unnecessary closing words, leaving only my steady breathing inside the car and the faint sound of cooling metal settling. I leaned back slightly into the driver's seat and closed my eyes, not from exhaustion, but because I needed one final second to sit with the version of myself that had survived silence before stepping toward the version of myself that would no longer accept it. Whatever was about to happen had already started moving, even if no one else could see it, even if no one else could hear it, even if no one else could understand it, until it was too late to stop it. The next morning, I sat alone with my phone in my hand when the first message appeared quietly on my screen, almost politely, as if the words themselves had no idea how heavy they were about to be. The message came from my cousin Sophia, and for a brief moment I stared at her name before opening it, even though I already understood that what was inside would not belong to imagination, but consequence. Sophia did not begin with a question or a greeting. She went straight into describing what happened, typing as if she was still trapped inside the room she was trying to bring back with words. She said the ballroom became calm again a few minutes after I left, people returning to their glasses and familiar conversations, believing the night would continue exactly as planned. Then, without any warning at all, the large screen behind the stage suddenly flickered. According to Sophia, at first, everyone assumed it was just a technical issue, the kind of failure that happens in luxury venues when schedules are pushed too tightly. The screen turned black for a few seconds, then lit up again. But instead of showing images or videos as expected, it began displaying rows of numbers. Lines of internal data appeared clearly, not blurred, not distorted, aligned neatly in columns that stretched across the entire screen, so every guest could see them. Sophia said the numbers were not difficult to understand. They were shown directly: gaps in revenue projections, internal loss adjustments, dates, percentages, and private notes that were never meant to leave secured systems. Mom reacted with panic she could not hide. Sophia described Mom's voice becoming sharp, repeatedly asking what was happening, demanding someone shut the screen off, scanning the room desperately for help. While no one reacted quickly enough, she said Mom's hands were shaking as she grabbed Dad, as if physical contact might stop the numbers that were already burning themselves into the eyes of everyone watching. Dad stood completely frozen. He did not move at all, his face losing its familiar expression, his mouth slightly open as if he wanted to speak, but could not find the right words for that moment. He did not shout or interrupt. He only stared at the screen as if he understood that control had left the room the second those numbers appeared. Ethan tried to leave while losing control of the expression on his face. He moved quickly between tables, nodding apologies out of instinct to guests who had not yet understood why he suddenly looked like someone trying to escape something invisible. She wrote that Ethan reached the side exit, pulled one of the doors open, and then stopped when hotel staff rushed toward him, locking down exits to prevent chaos while using calm voices that failed to hide their tension. The atmosphere inside the ballroom changed in just a few seconds, but that change was deep enough to never be reversed. Guests started talking without lowering their voices. Sophia said people leaned toward each other, no longer whispering politely like before, but speaking out loud in ways that matched the shock spreading through the room. They read parts of the data aloud. They questioned the kind of company that could hide information like this. They questioned why a celebration had been built on numbers that now felt dangerous. Some people took pictures of the screen. Others recorded videos. Some just stood silently staring without blinking. Hotel staff moved fast. Sophia wrote that they tried to redirect attention, tried to shut down the screen, tried to explain it was just a technical failure, tried to keep guests calm. But before any explanation could take effect, the damage had already settled in. The information had been seen. The pattern had been recognized. Faces had already changed. Sophia's last message arrived slower than the ones before. She wrote that the party never recovered. The cake stayed untouched. The glasses remained half full. The music never came back on after that. She said no one laughed again. Finally, Sophia typed one short line that stayed on my screen longer than all the messages before it. You were not there, but everything you said became real. A week later, the world did not explode overnight. Yet, every system that protected their version of reality began to crack in quiet, documented ways that could not be ignored or brushed aside. News did not arrive through shouting or dramatic headlines because the first signs appeared through official letters, silent meetings, unanswered emails, and documents that moved through hands far more powerful than any of us had ever been. The company where Ethan had built his reputation was placed under formal investigation. It did not begin loudly, and it did not feel fast at first, but it carried weight because it did not rely on rumors. Inspectors arrived with authority that could not be postponed. Auditors requested records that could not be cleaned in time. Lawyers joined calls that could not be treated as harmless conversations. What had once been whispers became sealed processes conducted behind doors that no longer welcomed smiles. Ethan's position was suspended without ceremony. There was no farewell speech. There was no protective announcement. There was only a cold absence where his influence once lived. His access disappeared. His meetings stopped being scheduled. His name stopped being mentioned with admiration. People who once waited for his approval began quietly shifting their loyalty toward those who still stood safely in power. Mom's world changed in ways that could not be repaired by makeup, posture, or social grace. Invitations stopped arriving. Friendly messages became distant. Conversations that once flowed easily ended quickly, replaced by uncomfortable politeness or complete silence. She began to recognize that many of the smiles she trusted were never real support, only reflections of status that disappeared the moment the shine faded. Dad's business relationships cracked under quiet pressure that never needed to become loud. Phone calls were no longer returned. Meetings were postponed with vague explanations. Long-standing partners began protecting their own names by stepping away without confrontation. Decades of connections weakened within days because association became a risk no one wanted to manage. He did not lose everything publicly. Yet, he lost something far more dangerous: influence. The first attempts to reach me were cautious. A missed call appeared without a message. A text arrived without words that could be taken back. Emails were sent, then deleted, then rewritten. The tone shifted from confidence to confusion, from authority to hesitation. Nobody demanded anything. Nobody blamed anyone. They simply tried to rebuild a bridge they had burned for years without realizing they would ever need to cross it again. I did not answer. The second wave of contact was less controlled. Messages arrived at odd hours. Voicemails carried pauses that had never existed before. Names that once spoke loudly now spoke carefully. Requests replaced commands. Apologies began to form without being fully written. They did not know what to say because they had never practiced needing me before. I still did not answer. Ethan tried through silence rather than words. A call appeared late at night. It ended before reaching the final ring. Another followed days later and stopped again. There was no strength left in the attempt. Only habit and disbelief combined into a fragile kind of pride that could not fully break, yet could not stand the same way again, either. I did not answer. By the end of the week, their home felt different, though I was not there to see it. It became quiet in a way that did not offer peace. It felt empty in a way that did not offer freedom. They were surrounded by consequences they had never prepared for, standing inside a life that could no longer pretend I had never existed. I watched none of it directly. I did not follow headlines. I did not search their names. I did not ask questions through mutual connections. I did not need confirmation because the feeling of safety did not come from watching them fall, but from finally understanding that I no longer belonged inside the cycle they created. Silence did not feel like disappearance anymore. Silence felt like control. I kept my distance without anger. I protected my space without explanation. I allowed their messages to exist without becoming part of them, because answering would have meant stepping back into a version of myself that I had already outgrown. They looked for me everywhere. I remained somewhere they no longer had access to. 8 months later, my life no longer had any space where my family could enter, whether through memory, habit, or expectation, because I had removed every door that once existed between us and replaced them with silence that felt intentional instead of heavy. I changed my phone number without explanation, not out of fear, but out of clarity, because I no longer needed to hear voices that only knew how to speak when they wanted something from me. The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt clean, controlled, and finally honest. I stopped checking unknown emails, stopped answering unfamiliar calls, stopped wondering if someone might show up in my life with a sudden realization or apology. I understood that peace does not come from conversations that happen too late or from people who only learn your value after they lose access to it. My life became smaller in a way that felt powerful because fewer people had access to my thoughts, my time, and my emotional space. There were mornings when I woke up without tension in my shoulders, without rehearsing conversations that would never happen, without feeling the invisible weight of being ranked, compared, or silently measured against someone else. I began to notice the quiet parts of my life more clearly, like the way sunlight sat softly across my floor, or how the air felt lighter inside my home when I realized no one could enter it uninvited, physically or emotionally. I did not look for understanding. I did not look for forgiveness. I did not need closure, because closure often belongs to the people who hurt you, not the people who survive them. I learned that sometimes the kindest thing you can give yourself is a full stop, not a question mark, not a comma, not a second chance. I existed without explanation, and that was enough. Some people call this coldness. Some call it distance. I call it safety. I built a life where no one could rewrite my worth, where no one could interrupt my peace with old narratives or familiar expectations. I did not become angry. I did not become bitter. I became unreachable. And in that unreachable space, I found something better than reconciliation. I found control. The hardest lesson I learned was that walking away does not make you weak. And choosing silence does not make you cruel. Protecting your peace is not selfish, especially when you have spent years shrinking yourself to make others comfortable. You do not owe explanations to people who never listened, and you do not owe loyalty to people who only valued you when it was convenient for them. Healing sometimes looks like distance, not forgiveness. Thank you for listening to this story and staying until the end. Your time means more than you realize, especially when stories like this reflect real emotions and real experiences that many people quietly live through. If this story connected with you in any way, share your thoughts in the comments. I read them,